Welcome to Excel Basics video number 24. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about visualizing quantitative data, which just means number data with Excel charts. And there'll be a big emphasis on no chart junk. That will be our guiding rule as we learn how to create charts like column, bar, line, and XY scatter. Yes, indeed, here's a big red no. We're going to learn the one overriding rule, which is no chart junk, no 3D pies, no ridiculous color, no unnecessary repetition, and so on. Over on data analysis, yes, we've been doing data analysis and business intelligence throughout this whole class, always converting raw data into useful information. Yes, we've made pivot tables, formulas, and now we want to see how to create yet another type of useful information, visualizing quantitative data with Excel charts. Proper data set. Yes, it is possible to create a chart from a column of numbers, but you absolutely want to have the field name at the top, because when you do that and you highlight it internally in the chart, then the number range called series will be called sales. And our category label, for example, will be called sales rep. That'll be internal inside of the chart, which will help us manage and edit the data if we need to. So far in this class, we've seen all these features for data analysis, and so today we get to see Excel charts. Over on charts in this video, we will see how to create column charts, bar charts, clustered column charts, stacked column charts, and learn when to use a line and when to use an XY scatter. Now let's go over to the sheet pictures, because almost always we're going from transactional data into summarized tables, either with a pivot table or with formulas. Now, in this video, I will already have the data summarized with either a pivot table or Excel formulas. But we go from our proper data set with transactional records into some summarized table, and then we create a chart. Now, just so we're all on the same page, let's talk about chart terminology. Of course, the chart title is at the top. The numbers will always have a special name. Excel charts call those series of numbers. Then we have categories. We can have a category along the horizontal axis. In this case, it's month. We can also have a category in the legend, color-coded legend, to tell us what each color represents. And then, of course, for a column chart, the column height comes from the numbers. We also can have an XY scatter chart. And in an XY scatter, we have our chart title at the top. The numbers, X and Y, are still called series. These are the Y series numbers. These numbers here are the X series numbers. And instead of a category and a legend or along the horizontal axis, we're going to have axis labels here. Hours studied is the X variable. Test score is the Y variable. And then, of course, the internal, that means the intersection of a particular X and Y. Those are called our markers. Now, we also want to talk about our overriding rule. No chart junk. This chart is terrible. There's all sorts of chart junk in it. The biggest mistake with this chart is that they took a pie chart and tilted it on its side and represented it as a 3D chart. That totally distorts the proportions. Not only that, but there's this chaotic color scheme with these crazy patterns. The only time you want to use chaos when it comes to color and patterns is if your chart is actually about chaos. Like if you're doing a physics chart about chaos, or maybe you're doing a sales marketing report for a punk rock band that's all about chaos. But the rest of the time, that does not work. Also, look at this unnecessary repetition. We have months here, and also next to each pie piece. Then there's this series 1. That comes from not having your field name at the top of the column. And then, of course, a chart title that adds no useful description is total chart junk. So every time that we build a chart, we'll ask if each chart element is helping to contribute to the message. If it is, then it's not chart junk. If it's not, then it's chart junk. Now we want to go over to the sheet column and bar and look at our first example. Now our source data set, if we scroll over, as date, month, sales channel, product, and revenue. And we've created a cross-tabulated report where the row label is month and the column header is sales channel. We sold it in the store, mail order, or website. Now when we have a cross-tabulated report, we can use just the month in our chart, just the sales channel in our chart, or both. We're going to start off by doing just month. So I'm going to highlight month. That's the field name at the top in essence, or the name for that set of categories. Then I'm going to come over holding Control. I'm going to click on Total and highlight the numbers. I do not want the grand overall total. I want just the totals for each month. Now, charts. Over in Insert, Chart Group. And when you're comparing numbers across categories, in our case months, we can use a column chart. So I'm going to click the drop down. We do not want to use 3D charts. That's chart junk. When we're comparing across categories, we can show column or bar. We're going to start by using clustered column. We'll come back and look at stack column later. Let's do clustered column. Now there's no clustered column because we only have one set of categories. When you have multiple categories like we do when we later do the cross tab table, then we'll have horizontal and legend entries for our categories. Now already that's looking pretty good. For each element we're going to ask, is it chart junk? Well, of course, we have our numbers here. We need those to understand the height of each column. The columns are fine. The labels are fine. The one thing that doesn't help articulate our message perhaps is our title. And notice that actual word title came from that cell right there. And actually, you can see the range is highlighted because this chart is dynamic. If we change any of these numbers or labels, they will change in our chart. But I want to type a different chart title. Let's click on the chart title. And when we see the solid line, not when I click inside and see that dotted line, but if you click on the outside again, when you see the solid line, you can just start typing some title and hit Enter. But I actually want to link this chart title to the text in cell G1. So you ready? With the solid line, again, not that dotted line because it won't work. Solid line, type an equal sign. That immediately starts a formula up in the formula bar. And I can click in cell G1. It shows me the sheet name and the cell reference. I hit Enter. That registers the formula for that chart title. Now, this is dynamic, so I can come up to this cell and type something. I'm going to type Winsport Incorporated space and then Enter. And instantly, our chart title updates. Now, it doesn't look like we have any chart junk in our chart. The grid lines, sometimes people click on them and don't click on the outside edge of the grid line because then it highlights the whole inner part. Click on one of the inner lines, and when you see those grid lines, you can actually delete them if you want. Sometimes people like to delete them. I'm going to delete them because it leaves it less cluttered. Control-Z because I want to put those grid lines back in. The grid lines simply help to match up column heights with the numbers in our vertical axis. Now I want to point to the outside edge. And again, be careful if you're moving your chart. Don't click on the inside because if you click in with your move cursor right there, move it, it'll actually move the insides of the chart. I want to click on the outside edge. And when I see my move cursor, I can click and drag. Now, with the whole chart selected, I want to copy it, Control-C, and very carefully, I'm going to click off to the side in the cells. And now I'm going to Control-V. Now, I want to change this to a bar chart so we can compare and contrast column and what we'll do in a second, bar. With the chart selected, you can go up to Chart Tools, Design, and there it is, Change Chart Type. Or you can right-click the chart and point to Change Chart Type. On the left, we can choose what chart type we want. I want bar. The first one, clustered bar, is fine. Click OK. Now, column and bar do the same thing. They show you differences across categories. Differences across categories. But the bar will more forcefully emphasize the difference between the bars than will the column chart. And the reason is simple. When we tip the column on its side, because the chart is wider than it is tall, that means the bars are longer, and it more forcefully emphasizes the differences. The other thing that a bar chart will do that a column chart doesn't do as well is if you have really long labels. Bar charts will list the label on one line, whereas the column chart will wrap the labels. But in essence, they do the same thing. Column and bar, compare differences across category. Now let's change this one up a little bit and learn something about formatting. There are two ways we can format. We can use the buttons to the right, or we can select an element, as we will in a second, and open a task pane to format or change how that chart element looks. The first thing I want to do is I want to add numbers to the end of each bar. These are called data labels. So I come up to the plus. And the plus is great because it allows us to check and uncheck chart elements. You could see the axes, that's the numbers and the labels right there. Chart title and grid lines are all checked. I want to check data labels. And just like that, I see the exact number from our cells listed at the end of each bar. This works on column charts also. Now, as soon as we do that, we either need to put our numbers at the end of each bar or down in the horizontal axis. It's rare that you would want them in both places. In essence, right now, this is chart junk. This is unnecessary repetition. Now, it's nice to have the horizontal axis because it doesn't clutter the chart up as much. That's a good reason to have the horizontal axis. The labels at the end, however, show you the exact number. So when you're after showing the exact number, then this would be preferable over our horizontal axis. Now, let's delete this. So let's click over here. This is unnecessary repetition. In essence, chart junk. So I'm simply going to hit the delete key to delete that. Now, we can use the green plus to check and uncheck chart elements. You can come to the format and change the style or the color. I very rarely use this. A lot of this is chart junky, but some of it's not. That's kind of nice there. We can also come to the filter and uncheck certain items and check certain items. Now, we're not going to uncheck or check anything. All we did was use that green plus to add data labels. Now, I want to come and click on the columns. And when you click on the columns, notice they're all highlighted. If you click a second time, then you're allowed to do something to just that column. And I click in the white, click back, because I want to highlight all of them. Now, just like we would in the cells, use Control-1 to open up format cells, in a chart, we can select the chart element we want and use Control-1 to open up our task pane. Now, the nice thing about the task pane is right now it says Format Data Series. Series are the numbers. If I click in the chart area, this changes. The formatting elements in the task pane now are for Format Chart Area. I'm going to click on the columns. Come here and click this a second time to get rid of that. Now, once we get to the particular format chart element we want, you can click on the different icons at the top. This will format the actual columns. And for us, there's gap width. We're not going to change that. Effects, that's mostly chart junk. We want to go over to the paint bucket. And there's fill. We can click that triangle and border. Now, you can select solid and then change whatever you want. Similarly, you could have a border, click solid, and change the color. What I want to come over and do is check vary points by color. All right, so we can use the task pane and our buttons to the right to change how our chart looks. Now I want to come over and create a cross-tabulated chart. I'm going to click the cell with month and very carefully highlight just the labels at the top of each column and the labels at the top of each row and the intersecting numbers. I do not want the totals. With that range selected, I can go up to Insert, over to Charts. Click the drop-down, and we want Clustered Column again. If I click that, I see, wow, it almost came out looking perfect right off the bat. Now I'm going to click on the chart underneath and then move it over to the side. Click on the chart and move it off to the side. Scroll over. All right, so this is what happens when we see a cross-tabulated report. Because our table was taller than it is wide, those category labels showed up in the horizontal axis. And then the column header labels showed up in the legend. Everything's looking pretty good except for the chart title. I'm going to select chart title, equal sign. That shoots me up to the formula bar. Click in cell G1 and enter. Now I want to copy this chart. This is a clustered column, and I want to change it to a stacked column and then compare and contrast. So I'm going to click on the outside edge, Control-C to copy. Click below, Control-V to paste. I'm going to click and drag this a little bit to the side. Click and drag this one right here. Now I want to change the chart type. Right-click, Change Chart Type. And I want to select from column the second one, Stacked Column. I select that. Click OK. And there we go. The exact same numbers in a stacked column and a clustered column. Now, the only difference between these two is the emphasis. Here, clearly, we are emphasizing the items in the legend because for each month, we're allowed to compare in-store, mail order, and websites. Over in this chart, the emphasis is on the horizontal axis, the months, because I clearly can compare the total for June to the total in August. You can see over in this chart, it's very hard to see which month was biggest. So when we do stacked column, we're emphasizing the horizontal axis. When we do clustered column, we're emphasizing the legend. All right, so we saw column and bar for a single variable, and then for a cross tab where we have two variables or two conditions or criteria, we can use clustered columns or stacked columns. By the way, you can do bars on both of these also. Now, one last tip about bar and column. I'm going to copy this chart, Control-C, and click down here, Control-V. Right-click, Change Chart Type. And I want to change it to pie. Click OK. Pie charts are not as effective for comparing numbers across categories. And the reason why, research shows that humans, when they're looking at a bar or a column, can decipher or understand the difference between the categories more clearly with a bar or column than they can a pie chart. And in the last 5 years of doing data analysis or analytics or business intelligence, you'll see that most people prefer the bar or the column to the pie when comparing numbers across categories. All right, let's look at our next chart. I want to go over to the sheet line. Now, a line chart is almost always some number being compared across time. Occasionally, this is some category. Here, our time is quarter, and years. So we want to see a line that goes up and down and shows us the trend or pattern over time. Now, we're going to start with a simple one here. We have 4 quarters and 4 numbers. I'm going to click in a single cell in our proper data set. And since we're using both columns and we want both labels at the top, we can simply click a single cell, go over to Insert, Chart Group, and the line chart is right here. That's the XY scatter. That's when you have two numbers, one for the X and one for the Y axis. When you have a single number and categories or time, that's when you use the line chart. Now we're going to use either the first one that has just line or the third one, line and markers. I'm going to choose line and markers. Now there's our chart. We can see the up and down movement of those numbers over our time quarters. Now one thing about this is notice we're starting way up at 500,000. So I want to change where the axis starts. So I'm going to click on the axis. Control-1 to open up or move the task pane to the right section of the task pane. And there it is, min and max. Sometimes it doesn't work when you use Control-1, so you literally have to click between each one of the icons to find what you're looking for. I'm going to highlight min 0.0 and type a 5 and then 5 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, tab. And instantly we could see our axis starting at 500,000. Now, in the same axis options or series, I want to come down to number. This is number formatting. It doesn't change the number. It just displays it a certain way. And I want to change decimal places to 0, tab. And there we go. We see it's showing in zeros. Now, if it wasn't obvious from the context what this was, like the name of the company or something like that, we would change that chart title. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. I'm simply going to click. And instead of linking it to a cell up here, since I don't have a chart title, with the solid line, I'm simply going to start typing. Wind. Notice as soon as I start typing, it appears up in the formula bar. Sport, space, incorporated, sales, and enter. We're going to assume that it's obvious from the context what year that would be. Now, that's just a single line. Sometimes you have the actual revenue and expense, which means we do have two numbers. But the two numbers are not going to be on the horizontal and vertical axis like an XY scatter. Both numbers are going to be plotted on the vertical axis. Also, notice I have number formatting displaying the number without two decimals like up here. So if that's the case, the chart will pick it up. Click in a single cell, insert, over to charts, drop down for line. This time I'm going to use just the first one, line. I'm going to click on the chart title and type Wind Sport Incorporated Sales and enter. Notice right away we see that there are 0 decimals displayed. We see down in the bottom, because we have two numbers on the vertical axis, there is a legend. I'm going to leave that chart just like that. All of the elements are working. There's no chart junk. I'm going to move this to the side. I can clearly see there is some chart junk. I didn't spell this right, so I'm going to click, come up to the formula bar. Look at that. It's not there. That's why I always like typing it into the cell. No problem. Now I'm going to click a second time in the chart title. I see the dotted line. Now I can start typing inside the chart title. Now, once I have edited this, I'm going to click off to the side. Now, one last line chart. It's very common. We have individual day dates or end of the month dates or years. I'm going to click in a single cell, go up to Insert, over to Charts, and the line chart. I'm going to select the marker one. Click. Instantly, I can see there is a problem. And what happened is the line chart was trying to be polite. It sensed that there was two numbers, and since this is a line chart, it thought it was supposed to plot both numbers on the vertical axis. Really, those should be our category labels along the bottom horizontal axis. So there's two ways we can edit the source data. And this is really the most important trick, because lots of times our charts do not come out how we want them. Select the chart, go up to Chart Tools, Design. There it is, Select Data. Or you can come and right-click the chart, Select Data. And this is the real power of charting. We have total control over series. Those are the numbers plotted. Notice we have year and sales because it plotted two numbers. Over here, category. Those are the horizontal labels. The first thing we want to do is select year, and we can remove, edit, and add. We want to remove. If it's got the wrong range, you can select this and click Edit. Sometimes we have to come here and add certain ranges from our spreadsheet. Now we can come over and click Edit. Sure enough, the axis label range, I can simply come over and highlight just the labels I want. And there we go. Click OK. Click OK. We're going to leave the chart title as Sales. Click on the legend, Delete. And there we go. We see the up and down trend over time. In this chart, we definitely wanted to use that Select Data or right-click Select. That oftentimes is the key to making sure your chart is pointing to the right data from the cells. Now we want to go look at our last chart type, XY sheet. And we have hours studied and test score. That means we went out and collected a sample of data from students. This student studied 15 hours for this big test and got 95. This one studied 22 and got 195. This one studied 2 hours and got 51. Once we have these pairs of numbers, x and y, we can plot it and visualize it to see if there is a relationship between hours studied and test score. Now I'm going to click in a single cell, go up to Insert, over to the Chart Group, the drop-down, and there it is. When you have sample data, you use the markers, the scatter plot. When you have a model, like a fixed cost, variable cost model that you built with formulas that have an x and a y, then you use the line. Now in the class after this, Business 218 Spreadsheet Construction, or the Highline class here at YouTube, or actually some of my other classes, we do the fixed cost, variable cost analysis and use that line. But when you have sample data and you're simply looking at a visual of the relationship between two numbers, you use the scatter. So I'm going to click that. Now, we look at this, and we immediately want to be able to pick out what is terribly wrong with this chart. When I look at this chart, I see some numbers, but I have no idea what those numbers mean. So we absolutely want to come up to our green plus and add the chart element, Axis Titles. Now, when I check this, it immediately adds two Axis Titles, and the Y will always be highlighted. So immediately we can type an equal sign that shoots me up to the formula bar, test score. That is our Y variable. I click on that cell and hit Enter. Now I come down to the X label, equal sign that shoots me up to the formula bar, and hours studied. Enter. Immediately I want to come up and change the label in the cell. Hours studied, F2, space, equal sign, space. That is our X variable. Tab, F2, space, equal sign, space, Y. That is our predicted variable if we were doing regression and creating a regression line. Now, we have our labels. Already, that is 100 times better than when we first clicked the button for the scatter chart, because now we can clearly see hours studied, test score. Now we want to click on the chart title, and actually, I want to click in the cell F1 and type title, colon, tab, and the title is going to be, is there a relationship between hours studied and test score? Enter. Now I'm going to click on chart title, equal sign, shoots me up to the formula bar. I click in G1 and Enter. Now, if you want to change the font, there's a few places we can do it. I'm going to come up to the font group, click the drop down, and choose like 11 or 12. How about 11? And there you go. There's our X, Y scatter. And we're looking at this. The whole reason that this is such an amazing visual is now, from all of this raw data, we can see if there is a relationship. What happens as we increase our study? Does test score tend to go down, or does test score tend to go up? Well, it looks like it tends to go up as the number of hours studied increases, it looks like the test score increases. Now in a stat class, we build the slope and the intercept and build the line and everything. But if you have a chart, you can simply come to any of the markers, click on them, right click, and say add trend line. There's also over in the green plus an add trend line. I'm going to right click and point to add trend line. Look at that. Now over in our task pane, it says linear. I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to display the equation and the r squared, the goodness of fit, right on the chart. Now I want to click on the grid lines inside and delete. Click on the vertical grid lines and delete. Click on the equation, and with my move cursor, I'm going to move it down here. Now in a stats class, we talk about intercept, slope, and r squared. But this isn't a stat class. It simply is learning how important it is to visualize data. And when it comes to X, Y, scatter, they have some really awesome tools built in right to our chart. All right, that's X, Y, scatter when you have two numbers and you want to plot the relationship between those two numbers. Now let's go over to one last example. I'm going to click on RC. And RC stands for recommended chart. This is a new feature they added in Excel 2013. Now notice we have not summarized this. If I want to figure out what the total for each one of the products is and then make a chart, well, there's an intermediate step. I have to either with formulas or pivot table create the total for each product. Well, we can now, with this transactional data set, click in a single cell, go up to Insert, and there's Recommended Charts. I click on this, and in essence, behind the scenes, you can see that pivot table icon. It goes and behind the scenes builds a bunch of pivot tables, suggesting ones that you might want. There's average of revenue. This one right here is count of revenue. This one is sum of revenue. That's pretty amazing. Now, that one's actually plotting each individual transaction, and that's not what we want. But watch what happens when I click on this. It'll actually insert a new sheet. So I'm going to click on that, click on OK, and it inserts a new sheet. I'm going to scroll over, and it built the pivot table and a chart connected to that pivot table. Now I'm immediately going to come down here, double click, and call this product R for product report, and enter. If I click in here, I clearly see there's the pivot table fields. When I click on the chart, it changes to pivot chart fields. And instead of listing column and row, it lists series and category. Now, that's pretty amazing with a single click. And you could format this as you'd like, including there's this important button over here. Field buttons, you can actually, if you don't want those, you can simply toggle them off. And you could format that as you want. Now, there are a bunch of homework problems over here if you want to practice for charts in Excel. Now, in this video, we saw a bunch of charting examples, including the amazing recommended chart that builds a pivot table and a chart from a transactional data set. We talked about the XY scatter. Remember, when you have two variables, X and Y, and you want to see the relationship, go ahead and plot it. And remember to put your X and Y labels. Over on the line chart, we saw that line charts are good when you have a single number on the vertical axis and you want to plot it against almost always a time category on the horizontal axis. Then over on column and bar, we talked about bar and column to compare numbers across categories as opposed to a pie chart. And we saw the clustered column and stacked column, where the stacked column emphasizes the horizontal labels and the clustered column emphasizes the legend items. All right, that's a little bit about charting. And this is our second to last, our penultimate Excel Basics video. In our next video, our last Excel Basics video, we'll have Excel Basics 25. And be sure to tune in because it'll be a fun one. All right, if you like this video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. We'll see you next video.